Patent claim construction. This can often seem like a very murky area, which is sort of why I chose the image for this slide, but I think that we can get some clarity. So to start talking about patent claim construction, which is a fancy word for how to interpret a patent claim, I thought we'd start with looking at some actual claims. So these are claims from actually issued US patents. Now, the first thing I want to bring your attention to is that each patent claim is numbered and they have individual components, which are sometimes called elements. So on the left, if you look at claim 1, you should see that there are 5 different elements listed. Now, on the right, you have patent claim 1 with just 2 elements. There isn't necessarily one right way to do it, but most people who draft patents try to separate out the elements, and these are some examples that I think are easier than if it was one giant long paragraph. Now, you may have noticed that these are very long sentences, but that is actually required under the patent statute that a patent claim must be one sentence. So it would probably never pass muster as a good grammatically correct sentence, but there are restrictions for patent laws. Now, the other critical thing to think about patents is that there are different types of claims, so-called independent claims, which stand on their own, and then dependent claims that depend on an independent claim. So the first claim of every patent is always the independent claim. You can just read that on its own, and that's it. Dependent claims always refer to another one. So you should see that claims 2, 3, 4 on the left all refer to claim 1. So basically, it's a shorthand method. Instead of repeating everything in claim 1, they're saying, okay, all of the above plus, now let me specify an additional thing. So that's the big difference between independent and dependent claims. Now let's start talking about how to construe a claim. So on the left, the green, this is supposed to be your tips for how to properly construe a claim. The first thing to know is that you look at all the elements of the claim and you look at the meaning, the ordinary meaning of these elements to the person of skill in the art, someone of the inventor's skill, at the time of the invention. So the light bulb I have here is meant to remind you that it's at the time of the invention, not at the time it's later evaluated, that you figure this out. Now, the second thing you do after starting with the claim language is that you look at the so-called intrinsic evidence, which is a fancy word for saying the inside of the patent. So you could see if the patent defines any of the terms that are in the claims. You could also look at other claims. So if there are dependent claims, usually that's a tip that whatever is in the dependent claim is not in the independent claim, or rather that the independent claim is not so limited. Now, I think of this as somewhat analogous to statutory interpretation. So just as when you're interpreting statutes, you assume clauses have different meanings, so too when you're interpreting a patent claim, you assume that the different claims are supposed to be different, not duplicative. And that's why you don't incorporate limits of dependent claims into the independent ones. Now, the last part of intrinsic evidence is prosecution history. So that's a fancy word for saying the back and forth between the applicant and the patent office could potentially have something that limits what the literal words in the claim mean. So if your claim used the word board, but in the prosecution history you said board definitely means certain kinds of boards with a certain composition, or that it excluded others, then you should be limited to that because the prosecution history is the public record and that's what you said. Now, what to avoid on the right? You don't want to limit the claims, the independent claims, to what is in the dependent claims. We already said that. You also don't want to limit the claims to examples in the patent, like examples that are either written or in illustrations. Now, that may sound very theoretical, so let's take an example. So, this is from a real US patent. I just gave you 4 claims because that seemed to fit on the slide. And then on the right are some images from the patent. So, as you know, claim 1 is the independent claim, and it talks about one of the elements is an umbrella. It doesn't say what the umbrella is made of or how big it is. And you should see that dependent claims 2, 3, and 4 do go into that detail. So what you should know here is that whereas claim 2 says it must be 5 to 7 inches, claim 1 is not limited to those dimensions. Similarly, claims 3 and 4 say what the umbrella is made of, but claim 1 doesn't say anything. That means it is not limited to those. So the umbrella under claim 1 is of whatever dimension and of whatever composition, definitely not limited to those things if you're looking at the claims. Similarly, there is an image, excuse me, in the patent with these palm trees. That doesn't mean you have to have palm trees. That is just an illustration. So similarly, it says beer here on the umbrella. You'll notice there's nothing in these claims that says it has to say beer. That's another example of how you should not incorporate things from the patent improperly into the claim. Hopefully that example from a real patent helps illustrate a little bit about claim construction.